Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll be starting just for the sake of time. Welcome to the Until All of Us Are Free graphic records launch and final webinar by the Women's Major Group. So just to start with some logistics notes, as more people will be coming in, interpretation is available in English, Spanish, and French, and we actually have some speakers who will be speaking in Spanish. So if you would like to listen in English or in French, please be sure to be in those channels. You can find the interpretation button on the bottom right of your screen. And just a reminder to everyone who will be speaking to speak slowly so the interpreters can do their language justice work. And I'll pass it to the Spanish interpreter to say this announcement in Spanish.
Gracias, Andrea. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Mi nombre es María Angélica, mis pronombres son ella y ellex. Recordándoles que para activar la interpretación desde su computador, por favor hagan clic en el botón abajo a la derecha, que es un globo que dice interpretación. Ahí eligen el idioma que prefieran y eso es todo. Si están en su teléfono, por favor, abajo a mano derecha de su teléfono, toquen los tres punticos que dice más. Ahí eligen interpretación de idiomas, escogen español si desean y arriba a mano derecha escogen hecho. Y las instrucciones están en el chat. Muchas gracias y ahora le paso el micrófono a mis colegas de interpretación en francés.
Bonjour ou bonsoir, bienvenue à cette réunion qui dispose donc d'interprétation en français, en espagnol, en anglais. Pour accéder à l'interprétation, cliquez sur le symbole en forme de globe, choisissez la langue voulue et vous pouvez choisir de couper l'audio original. Et si vous nous rejoignez avec un téléphone portable, cliquez sur les 3 petits points en haut à droite. Merci, bonne écoute.
Thank you so much, both. So just a reminder to be sure to be on the right interpretation channels. And again, thank you for being with us. This is just an additional reminder that this is a safe space. One warning will be given and then the participant will be removed from the Zoom. We don't tolerate any hate speech or discriminatory remarks, and this space and our feminism at the Women's Major Group is intersectional and for the liberation of all people in all our diversity. And additionally, Shanaz Kimaz, who you can see in the panelist list, is the accessibility and safety coordinator for the call. So you can also reach out to her directly if you have any issues or put them in the chat. And additionally, we'll be using the Q&A function to answer any questions towards the end of the session. So be sure to put those in there as you think of them. And just for some background, for those who might not know the series, the Until All of Us Are Free Intersectional Feminist Fishbowl series is a series of Women's Major Group sessions that we had back in 2021. They were basically Women's Major Group monthly member meetings, and we held them on LGBTQI+ communities' rights, Indigenous women's rights, Black and Afro-descendant women's rights, and sex workers' rights. Again, these all happened back in 2021 from September to December. And this was a series that really came out in the context of rising anti-rights movements, attacks on trans and Black lives, divisions in the global feminist movement. The Women's Major Group, in light of this, really wanted to reaffirm and strengthen our capacity in talking about feminism that is really intersectional, that looks at root causes, that is decolonial, and that really represents our vision for collective liberation, and unpacking what that means, and what better way to do that than hearing from our members themselves. So that's basically what the series consisted of. And today, what we're hoping to do is launch a series of graphics that look into these sessions that were created by the amazing illustrator Sonaksha, who is also here with us today. And these graphics, again, are on the 4 sessions that are listed on the screen and that I mentioned previously. And we really want to invite you all to post with us, to use these graphics, to talk about these issues, to talk about rights-based approaches. And they focus as well as the sessions on both the key demands of communities' rights in multilateral spaces, we talk about root causes, and then solidarity asks and what this vision of collective liberation looks like. So that's the way all of the sessions as well as the graphic records are structured. And thank you so much, Shanaz. I see you putting the links to things in the chat. So you can also see our social media handles on the screen to find the posts and repost them. We also welcome our members to put these on their websites and just share as widely as possible these amazing graphics that came out of this series that we'll be launching today. And without further ado, I'll actually like to pass it to Sonaksha, who's the illustrator of the graphic records. They created this graphic records based on the sessions and listening to them. So Sonaksha, I would just love to hear more from you about what your process was in making these illustrations and just in general, your thoughts about artivism and your work. Thanks so much for being with us here today. I know it's late for you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the chance to work together on creating these graphic records. It's been such a wonderful process, and I want to start off by thanking both Shanaz and you for really throughout the entire process, like bringing so much care and consideration to it. I think that something that often gets forgotten is the process of working on something as much as the outcome. So yeah, I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, to talk about the graphic records themselves. So I think for me, the idea of kind of combining art with activism has always been where my work has been rooted in, and I kind of see creativity as a way to really vision a more just future. And like, I think especially with these conversations, I love that we had the chance to also visually center the people and communities who are at the forefront of our movements. And yeah, and I think historically, the voices and views of these communities have often been like excluded and marginalized, and have also, like, whenever they are present, are either altered or silenced or ignored by mainstream narratives. So I think for me, the process of also creating these graphic records, listening to these conversations, was also about kind of creating like a comprehensive, like, visual archive of these conversations, these really important conversations, and also these spaces for learning and sharing that were created, to kind of create like a tangible documentation of our asks, of our dreams, of our intentions. And it's also something that I hope that we can kind of keep referring back to, and something that also perhaps acts as a witness of our movements, of our work, of what's being done. And yeah, I think apart from graphic records being a way for people to kind of revisit a thing or to catch up on something that they may have missed, I also see it as like an act of like viewing it as resistance, because like mainly platforms really rely on like fastness, on like constantly grabbing our attention from one thing to the next. But I think like when you're looking at like a comprehensive graphic record like this, there really is something about like slowing down, pausing, trying to really learn, take in all the details. So yeah, and even the process of getting them was really about like taking time to like listen and pick out things. And yeah, I hope that we can use it as a space to listen with intention. And yeah, I think only when we really give ourselves the time to sit with what we're hearing, are we going to be equipped to kind of keep moving forward and to really like to transform our spaces together with honesty and vulnerability. And yeah, and I think, and I hope that that the graphic records are able to kind of be that piece of art that you're able to use in these different ways, because the process of creating them has been really yeah, it has been something else for me. Like, I loved listening to all the speakers, all the conversations and discussions, and I learned so much. So yeah, I hope that it continues to be that way, and passes on through the movement. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and for the chance to work on these. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sonaksha. I really love what you said about these graphics just being like resistance in and of itself, of just like asking you to, instead of like just passively listen or something like that, to really slow down and take in all the beautiful knowledge being shared. And I was just screen sharing them, and I'll go through them again quickly just so folks joining us can see. And yeah, thanks again for being with us. And without further ado, I'll get to the part of this webinar that everyone has been waiting for, and just quickly introduce Almudena, who's our women's major group organizing partner for Europe and Central Asia, who will be moderating the session today, along with Toyin, who is the women's major group organizing partner for Anglophone Africa, who will also be moderating the session today. So I'll pass the floor to Almudena and Toyin. And once again, thank you everyone for joining us.
Hola, buenos días, buenas tardes.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Andrea, for giving me the mic. Thank you to my colleagues in the Women's Major Group for allowing me to be here today participating in this webinar, in this wonderful space. Thank you so much to Sonashka, excuse me if I mispronounce your name. Your work is wonderful. And I think that an example of the power that we have as a feminist movement to build our own alternatives of collective liberation from our narratives, from our experiences, lived experiences, from our own frameworks. I want to say, with what you were saying before, we are not reacting to the violence or to the current context. We are proposing alternatives. And I think that this is our utmost power, and we need to put it into action. So thank you so much. And I also want to thank my colleagues, Shanaz and Andrea, for leading and coordinating and putting all of their love and their urgency in this webinar series, and that I think are wonderful, and we need to continue, I think. I don't want to take up any more space. I'm going to ask the first question to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for joining us and for being with us today again here in this webinar. It's a question that we ask everyone. We ask everyone the same question. It's not an easy one, but you have a great deal of power. And it is, what is your vision for collective liberation? What does this word mean to you in the context of your own movements and your own communities? You can take the mic as you wish. I don't want to give anyone the mic, but for you to choose whoever wants to start. We do ask it to spend between 4 and 5 minutes to answer to this complex question, and also for you to do a little introduction of yourselves. Thank you so much, and the space is yours. Noelene, I didn't want to give everyone the mic, but would you like to start?
We all sit here going, please not me. It's like being back in school. The phrase that I think has always given me the most joy and hope is the idea of liberation on all territories. Because it allows you then, in its freedom of expression, it allows you to then work out where you're going to do your next set of work. You know, we're on this planet for a limited space and time. And you think about it and you say, okay, so if it's about liberation and true freedom, what might that look like? And how might my, choice and circumstances be engaged in that struggle for freedom? So I think when I heard that, and I think it comes out of the work of feminist activists from LAC, actually, from Latin American and Caribbean countries. And that sense of, oh, this is not, I remember hearing it very early, actually, and thinking to myself, okay, so if we're thinking about a personalist political engagement, that's what I want. That's what I want. I want to talk about that. I want to work on that. I want to work with people on that. And then, you go out and you start your kind of collective engagement. And for me, I find myself working in a radical feminist collective of lesbian, bisexual, trans and transmasculine and queer folk in the Pacific, and we're located in Fiji. So even that means that, the reason why I put this behind me, this beautiful kind of setting, which is it's actually my home island where I come from, Kandavu. And the reason why I put it up is it kind of locates me enough, but doesn't keep me, I always think that the ocean, because it covers so much, the Pacific Ocean covers 30% of the world, right? So it means that at one point I am both located, but I'm also free. And I have this fascination with manta rays, and it's for the same reason, that they cross great territories. They're kind of trans-boundary animals. And I think for me, that's always been a struggle in my life, is how do I both locate myself enough personally and politically, but also stay free? And that's the ultimate core goal. And that means then that you have to look at many, many different institutions, right? You have to look at your own relationships, for example, whatever kinds of relationships they are, the home you grow up in. Then it means that you have to also look at the place in which you find paid work, and it might be unpaid work as well. And here in the Pacific, we're doing a lot of work right now about that, which is how do you look at work in a way that is about boundaries and non-boundaries? Because if you look at women, we know they do, 76% of the unpaid care and domestic work in the world. All right, so that's another set that we're not thinking about. We bound these things by what is marketable, what is commodified. We say this is work and this is non-work. But for everyone who is feminist, we know very, very much that that's not the case. So that's another boundary we break. Feminists, I find, are the ones who always are able to kind of, unclick and reconfigure and are out there trying to kind of re-articulate what it is to be free, continually, over and over and over again. So in our own struggles for justice, here we are on Ida Hobart, or Ida Hot. We have to find a more elegant way, I think, to talk about this day that we're in today. But really what it's about is saying, the last points I'll kind of make, and I'll come back to certain things now, is I'm tired of this issue of asking permission. That's why when I put out a tweet for Ida Hobart, it becomes kind of like again, we're asking for some kind of moral grounding. We're asking to be included. We're asking, and that's not freedom, because freedom is the ability to be who you are in the world and to be able to claim all of those human rights, all of those rights as a body that moves through the world. And I find that even within the feminist movement, I've had times when I feel like I'm asking permission, permission to be fully who I am in the conversation, permission to push the boundaries, permission to be angry. And I think that if there's anything that I'm thinking a lot about nowadays at 54 years old, another biological boundary that we put on ourselves, because really, how does it matter? It matters that you're here in the world and you're doing your work. How do we be real about the fact that so many of the people that I'm working with are continually struggling every day on a very personal level, and then they come into our movement and they're struggling again. for genuine inclusion and genuine ability to be who we are in these incredible bodies. And then when we move into collectivities, oh yeah, you're okay as long as we stick to our agreement. Oh, but we don't get to say what our agreements are. Okay, well, we'll get to that. And that's why I love this series, because it allows us to, so my last point is, can we be real that there are many things, those who are in the center are often not decentered. So those in the center get not to name themselves. So we don't talk about, Amina and them are doing a lot of work around Black and Afro-descendant politics. And I really love that, but I want to also name whiteness, because in our region, it brings a lot of pain. The fact of my own skin color, which is on a great spectrum, the fact of others' skin colors and what that does, where you're allowed to sit in the room, who is the one who is able to sit in parliaments, who are the ones who are, and that is about skin color politics, but it's also about naming yourself as woman and naming yourself in solidarity with women. But what about gender non-binary people? Are we in solidarity with them when they're not in the room? So all of these issues of who gets to name and non-name, who gets to sit in silence and be the center, how do we decenter, and how do we in the movement, do we mind when others decenter us? Do we have a reaction? What's our personal reaction? And can we maybe get some good tactics and strategies about that? When I'm feeling, it's not just about a personal feeling, it's about the system moves and shifts, and it should. So when it does and we're decentered, how are we going to, in a very granular way, deal with those issues? To me, that's LGBTQI rights. To me, that's non-binary rights. To me, that's moving beyond individual sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics. That's about really getting down into it and saying, my body is okay as it is. My person is okay as it is. Now then, how do I negotiate with you as a human being and with other animals on the planet, 200 to 300 a day becoming extinct. We're in the greatest extinction phase. So that then opens another boundary that is about freedom and liberation for all of us on this living planet. Thanks.
I'm happy to jump in. I feel so deeply connected to you, Noelene, in so many ways. We've known each other for now, it feels like close to 20 years. My name is Amina Doherty, and I share the background of the sea because we are on opposite sides, almost it feels like, of the planet. I join all of you today from my island home of Antigua and Barbuda in the Caribbean, and connected by the ocean in many ways. And Noelene and I have shared movement work for almost 2 decades now, and also have shared work in this series, which has been a lovely series to be a part of. And I joined the conversation wearing multiple hats as one of the co-founders of the Black Feminist Fund, but also coming to the space as a colleague from the Equality Fund, and also as from the Global Fund for Women. So I come just bringing a lot of that shared energy and learning and space. And I think about one of my co-founders at the Black Feminist Fund who asks such a beautiful question, which I think is the same question we're being asked here today. And I have that question from Tanisha McHarris on my desk, which is, what's going to get us all free? She asks that question all the time, and I have it on my desk. And I think it's such a poignant question because it is that question of collective liberation. This work of not just for me, but what does it mean for all of us, and for all of us across all of our movements, and not just for someone who looks like me, but for all of the ways that we look and that we show up in our collective movements. And I think that's part of what Noelene was speaking to. And, as I've been reflecting on the conversations that have emerged from the series, and I think about the current context in the world, whether it's what's happening in Ukraine, or what recently happened in the US in Buffalo, or the growing experiences of Asian Americans in the US, or the current anti-abortion rhetoric that we hear, or the losses of trans sisters in Brazil, or the killing of recently of Shireen Abu Akleh. You know, I think about all of the folks that we continue to lose, and I think about all of the ways that we experience rollback on rights. And I'm the mother of a very vivacious 4-year-old girl. And I think that we aren't talking about, and I'm doing air quotes, marginalized communities. We are talking about ourselves. We are talking about ourselves, and we are talking about each other every single day. And so, you know, when I was reflecting on some of the language in the framing of the series, you know, what does it mean to talk about marginalized communities? We are talking about how every single one of us are experiencing a rollback of our rights every single day. And so for me, when I think about collective liberation, when I think about what it means to get each and every one of us free, it means what it means for each and every one of us to just live our lives in full ways, in safe ways, in peaceful ways. It is what it means for all of us to be safe and to be happy and to just be cared for and to be loved. And I think about, you know, in my work with the Black Feminist Fund, we always talk about Black joy. And I think in all of our numerous communities, that idea of movement joy is something that we are losing, because every day we are on the battlefront. Every single day we are fighting for our liberation. And so, you know, how do we shift from this sort of, in the work that I do, I see this sort of experience of protracted crisis that we face. You know, I see so many young people, so many people of all ages experiencing anger, sadness, depression, anxiety, right? Because this is the work that we are faced with every single day. And I wonder, you know, this is not the state that we are meant to be, right? And so my sort of, it's not the question that we are called to answer right now, but my call to action is, how do we bring back and center joy in the work that we do, right? This question of liberation is actively tied to joy for me. It is actively tied to care for me. It is actively tied to, how do we look after each other? How do we ensure that we are well? And so this idea of how are our feminist movements a collective home for all of us? How do I know that when I am in Antigua, I am also home in the same way when I am in Noelene's home in the Pacific, that I am in the same home when I am in Sanchez home, when I am in Tarcila's home, that our feminist movement is my collective home, that I am cared for, that is where I am looked after. And so, you know, that is for me what collective liberation, like getting us free, means that we are in a space where, in addition to having to sort of do the work, the movement work of fighting, that we also have moments of pause, that we have moments of joy, and that we have places of safety, and that our movements are our places of safety. And maybe the last thing I'll say is that, and I think it's because I have been in the space of, I come from the work of philanthropy and mobilizing funding and resources, is that we have to get to a place where we are not on the hamster wheel of trying to resource our movement, and that we are in a place that our movements have what we need, right? I think we have to collectively vision, you know, what our movements need and how we get that. Otherwise, I mean, you know, Noelene named her age. I'm turning 38 in a few days. And I feel like for the past 20 years of my life, I have been doing the same thing, I'm in a moment of reflection as my birthday comes up, and I love being a Gemini. I believe in the stars and the moons and all of those things. But in the past 20 years of my life, I have been doing this work of making the case and mobilizing resources and asking where is the funding and asking how can we resource, right? My wonderful, wonderful co-founder, Tanisha, says, you know, $5 million is not what's going to get us all free. So what is? And I think that that's the visioning we need to do together. So I'm going to stop there and maybe pass it on to another speaker.
Muchísimas gracias, Amina.
Thank you so much, Amina and Noelene, for your inspiring words and all the joy that is so important. Tarcila, would you like to continue? Would you like to take the mic? Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity of listening to each other. And from the indigenous women's perspective, I would say that we are facing challenges because from our commonalities, we have been fighting our whole lives. In some cases, we have started fighting in what we would call the internal front within our own movements, right? And indigenous women are not free from having all of the ways of exclusion precisely because of these nuances. So in the internal front, trying to raise our voices as women, as youth, as girls, in front of a wrongful copy of machismo, of the patriarchy, and also this word and concept that we are understanding better, which is racism, institutionalized racism, structural racism, which has many ways of exercising oppression. So I think that it's very important for us to be able to have these dialogues, and that in that great diversity, we are able to find a common ground. And we consider that i- in the edge of differences, of nuances, of our origins, we have, I think, a super important point, which is the fight against violences. Be whether we are from any sector, any group, I think that if we find a common point that calls us in or gathers us and makes us feel that we are part of that group that is against, has to be the eradication of violence in all of its different ways of expression. That is more or less what we have tried to work on together, and it also has implications in the individual and collective plane, because as part of a reivindication movement as peoples, we also have a collective rights as women, and we have had to take some time to to reivindicate our rights with the individual rights in gender, both collective and individual. And that is where we have found a position in the internal front. In the external front, which is part of the diverse movement, we could say that we have advanced a lot to understand the incorporation of individual rights as women and to not leave aside the collective rights. So, for example, this dialogue, talking with respect among the differences and diversities, I think is a great advancement that has to lead us to being stronger, but also more united and more in solidarity. I am always saying that how is it that, you know, there being a feminist or strong women movement? How is it that the status and social class that we belong to separates us? That is something that I would like for it to be put in the agenda, because if an indigenous girl is raped or murdered, it should hurt every woman. All of us who has a position against violence. It can't be possible that only one sector has to raise their voice and also to be subject to, very often, to mocking, being mocked because they tell us, oh, look at her. Now she's complaining. It's not that we're complaining. I think that the feeling and the dimension of human rights, both in in specifics, has advanced, and we are in that process of understanding others, but also trying to make ourselves be understood. Within the collective rights, for example, very often they told us, you don't revendicate gender, because we talk about collective rights, which is a priority. But if an indigenous woman is not in her territory, doesn't have access to resources, doesn't the individual rights are not being respected either. So we have to have clarity on how both rights complement each other, and how those collective rights also matter and affect the other diversities and the other movements, not just in gender, but uh, they encompass everything. We are in that process, and I am very grateful to have the opportunity to listen to you, to learn so much. With Noelene, at one point we have dreamed up things together. We still haven't concretized it. And with Andrea and each of you, listening to proposals, advancements, also or progress, and also conflicts. But I think that we need to have the honesty to look at what's pending, so that precisely we continue lifting those barriers that make us weak when we are standing alone in our own sectors or in our specific voices. So if we seek a common point, I think that we'll be able to be a lot stronger, more articulate, and to be able to achieve results, because we are in every corner of the world. We are indigenous, more or less 480 million around the world. And if we're half of the population with all of the differences, can you imagine? We're almost at 250 million, and we're not few. And when we talk about, for example, women, vulnerable women, and we don't want to be called vulnerable anymore, but we are in a position of vulnerability because of third parties. So the aspect that has to do with self-esteem, with valuing ourselves, of our own abilities and what we can do, has also been very important. But more than anything, looking at those other examples that you gave, leaderships of different generations, of different groups, diverse groups, and that is what encourages us. We are here for the future and the new generation that does everything faster, artistically, using new tools. I think that that's super important, in that you're super important in this process of building and create and finding common points. And with this, I would say that uh, we're in the right path. And thank you, Amina, for your comments, Noelene and Almudena, and the ones that will follow after me, like Sabrina. I think that that's where we're at, in having found spaces where we have found each other, and we are respecting each other, and we are sharing our proposals and our dreams. I think that is a great advancement. Thank you so much, Tarcila, for your words. Our strength is precisely in our diversities and how we respect uh, e- each other. And now I pass the mic to my wonderful friend Sabrina. Thank you for being here. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone, according to your time zone. I love to hear you all, to listen to you all. And of course, am just I can be but in agreement with everything that we have said and what we all have very clear is the commonalities, our common points. I think that these common points have to go beyond what we have been doing up to now. For 2 weeks, I have been in a world conference, LGBT conference. It's very big in the world, LGBTQ organizing. And yes, definitely identity politics have had a positive effect, but we are also seeing that they have their limitations, right? And they continue being the same limitations of gender, race, and class, right? And at least in LGBT activism, that's what I'm gonna refer to more here, because in my wearing my sex worker hat, I don't see that as an identity. It's a job. It's a matter of work, and the good conscience and society gives us an identity that we're whores and we just do this work. Well, but for me, it's not an identity. So evidently, it has something to do, it is related because it is a job that has been destined or is the one that has allowed us to live, to survive all these identities that are in the margins. Cisgender women, racialized immigrant women, trans women too, of all races, eh, more than anything, immigrant racialized women, and of more gender identities, also including lesbians, who seems like we don't exist in sex work. It seems like they're all heterosexual women, but no, there's also lesbian women who do sex work because it is a job. So as just like a lesbian can be prime minister, she can be a cashier or supermodel or a sex worker. So I think that all of our liberation goes through that recognition, that respect, that naming us, and it is being recognized as equals, being recognized as us being in the same ship. We are being swung by the same patriarchy, the same capitalism, the same criminal capitalism that murders all of us, the ones who are not as cis heterosexual men, just because we exist. Now, the cis heterosexual men they kill them because for getting in trouble and bad businesses and etc., but not just for being. And we already know that. But I think that we need to. It's like we need to remind others of that again, because it's still not understood. It's very interesting that we are at a level of ideas and discourse that is much more advanced than, sometimes like you open the social media and it seems as though we were living in 1933 or in the 20s, last century. So sometimes it's even worse, because at least in the past century in pharmacies you could find things that now are prohibited, and now you can find commercially. For me, the our own liberation, especially in these moments, is also present. in the fact that these repressive right-wing forces of quote unquote traditional values, we see Almudena does not let me lie. She was there at the CSW. You know, what's the state of the opposition, especially the Russian, that's always taking up the opportunity, the position of power that they have to sabotage all of the initiatives and say, no, men, women, and the men with a penis, you understand each other, a woman with a vulva, and that's it. So we need to counteract those discourses. We need to find that joy, like Amina was saying, which is also that joy that provides the background that I have here behind me right now, that joy that we all have of our sexuality, and also that this fight, this aggression, this backlash is also based on going back to those traditional values, which we know are completely functional to the heteropatriarchy, heterocapitalism, and that continues. Well, we already know where it takes us, and however, there are still identity movements, such as very often among gay white men, cisgender, that will reproduce the same logic that evidently, you know, in regards to gender, they benefit through it in the access to capital and social economically. You know, for them it's easy and it benefits them to marry their husband, and that's it. Now we need to propose and continue proposing alternatives and proposing escape routes. And I think that these spaces, especially that are so well organized and with so much love and so much care by the Women's Major Group, um, are necessary spaces to continue posing an alternative to this backlash that seems to, you know, they're not dumb. They're also listening to us. They take our discourses and they turn them around, and they turn them into a spiel, and we need to be reacting and um, making our discourses very clear so that people don't use them against us. Now it seems that it's like, you know, now it seems like the interpreter did not understand that. So now I'm going to finish, and I am very grateful for all of you. You are all a complete inspiration and an immense source of wisdom. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sabrina. Now I quickly pass the mic to my colleague Toyin. So they may ask the second question. We are running out of time. So Toyin, it's your turn. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much to all our panelists. Wonderful conversation. Totally enjoying myself. And for the last question, I think it touches on something that Sabrina had mentioned about, you know, going beyond what we have been doing. So the last question and is just around, you know, what's next? What call to action do you have? Most of us here, if not everyone, we are civil society people, you know, working across different movements. And so what's that one thing that you want us to leave today's meeting with, you know, leave it burning in our minds that we can take action on as we leave this webinar? And you know, because of time, I'll just say we have 1 minute to just say the one thing. Yeah. So who wants to take the floor first? Amina, maybe you can start.
Sure, I will take my 1 minute just to say,
Okay.
pull on maybe something that Noelene said, which was around, you know, this idea of decentering yourself, and how do you, in your work, really ensure that you're creating space for others that may not necessarily look like you. And I know that, you know, we're in a space of civil society people, so maybe I'll use the language that we're familiar with, and I'll say, how do we ensure we're bringing the margins to the center? Maybe that's language that feels familiar to people, but you know, what feels right to me is to say, you know, to really ensure that if there are folks that may not necessarily look like you, to make sure that we're creating space for them in the heart of our movements, and to ensure that, you know, sometimes it means ceding space from yourself. So though I accepted to be a speaker in a space like this, on a panel like this, I often say no, and I often suggest other people. And I often say, no, but I have an amazing colleague who would actually be a much better speaker and a much better representative of the work. And that person may be a younger person who is a 13 or a 14-year-old. It may be a trans colleague who does not often get access to spaces like this for a number of other reasons. It may be, you know, a number of folks who do not often have access to platforms like this. And so my call to action is to decenter self, make space in the heart of not just our own movements, but the spaces that you have more access to. And so that's my call to action.
Thank you. Noelene, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm going to be naughty. I'll have two. The first thing is feel the full range of emotions and feel okay about that. You know, I agree with Amina that we have to build joy every day. I also think, though, that we have to feel the anger, because the anger sharpens us and the anger keeps us on track in a really, really difficult world. And the second part to that is we are facing a ecological crisis, you know, the likes of which, as a species, we are not seeing the change that we require. And in this decade, this 5 years is going to be the decisions will be made on how our next 6 to 7 generations will travel, if they travel at all on this planet. And so saying that is about harnessing everything that we have in order to work for ecological justice together. And that means that we have to get liberation on all territories. That means that feminists and feminist work become ever more important. So I'm so grateful and joyous to be in the struggle with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Noelene. Tarcila, would you go next?
Yes, please. In the same route as Noelene, I would say that we may never lose the ability of feeling indignant about unacceptable situation. It's like we rebel ourselves, you know, to continue having the ability to rebel. The second thing is that we need to stay together to eradicate the violences and discriminations. Everything, one way or another, we all need to be looking that maybe there's somebody missing, maybe there is a face that is not present, there is an image that is not present, there is a sector that is not present. Because during many centuries, we could say that other people always spoke for third parties, and it is time for us to speak for ourselves. And that we are going to achieve only by giving space to those who have not had the possibility, the ability to raise their own voice.
Thank you so much. And Sabrina?
Pues yo rápidamente.
Well, so I'll quickly, my call to action would be a little more materialistic, if we can say it that way. Unfortunately, many of our movements, especially the one that I represent also in Europe, which is the sex worker movement, finding funds is very complicated. To be able to find government funds is basically impossible. You know, and then you try to rescue and trying to abolish institutions. If you talk about rights, it is very complicated. So if you have the opportunity of speaking with funders, about giving the opportunity of putting sex workers in the same room, as the people who are in charge of philanthropy, it will be appreciated, because it is a space that we don't have access to, and it is a space where trans women don't have access to either. So we always go back to that point of putting the people who are not in the places where things are being decided on, and to be a space where we can have something to say. And thank you so much, and very grateful to be here.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think I'm going to have to hand over to Shanaz now to do a wrap up, because we've checked and I don't see that we have any questions in the question and answer section. So Shanaz, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toyin, and thank you all to everyone who has joined us as both as participants, but also as speakers. This is the second time today where I have listened to people who were in great despair for the state of the world currently, but who have found their homes, their joy, their solidarity, their grounding with the feminists that they are in conversation with at that point. And I feel very much the same with all of you. Thank you all so much. It is one of our hopes and goals as the Women's Major Group to open up more spaces, make sure more of our members are able to access more of the spaces, like push the spaces open as much as we can for all of our members, definitely prioritizing the voices that have not been heard both historically and currently. And just a great idea of great feeling of solidarity and gratitude to all of you. And I have to also give gratitude to Andrea for being the initiator of this idea. And it has been an incredible series because of her, to Sonaksha, because all the graphic recordings are both so beautiful, but also so powerful. It has been an honor from my end to just disseminate them to the world today and look into the question how we as feminist women can stand in better solidarity with each other, among each other, but also across movements. And as Sabrina has said, we are facing very strong attacks from different ends, from different groups, but standing in solidarity and making sure that solidarity is visible, standing strong next to each other, and being able to support each other and making the support visible as well is, I think, one of the ways that we will hopefully break their strength. So thank you all so much for all of this. Thank you all so much for joining, and really looking forward to the future spaces and places that we can all be together.